They didn't forget my name. They just pretended it wasn't worth remembering. You'd think your own parents would clap when you brought home a Strata report card. Or ask you about the school play you got the lead in. Or even just glance up from their phones when you walk through the door. But in our house, all the light belonged to my sister, Lauren. Lauren the beauty. Lauren the rising fashion star. Lauren, who got into Parsons and had a full tuition ride paid, of course, by our parents. I wasn't jealous of her success. I was just invisible. I was Natalie, the other daughter. They said I was quiet, bookish, not as charismatic, but what they meant was, not as shiny. I remember once, I got second place in a statewide science competition. I came home glowing, clutching the certificate. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Oh, that's nice," he said, and went back to reading. Meanwhile, Lauren had just posted an Instagram picture that hit 4,000 likes. They made a whole celebration dinner for that. It wasn't always like that. When I was little, I thought I was loved, but something changed when we grew older. I stopped being cute and started being inconvenient. They said I was too sensitive, that I took things personally. But what else do you call it when your parents forget your birthday 2 years in a row? Or when the Christmas gifts are luxury skincare for Lauren, and socks for you? Yeah, socks. One year, it was a 3-pack. There was this one night I'll never forget. I was 14, and we were having dinner. Lauren was talking again about some influencer who followed her. I tried to mention I'd been invited to a summer writing camp. "Is that one of those online things?" Mom asked, distracted. "Because we're not paying for another hobby." It wasn't a hobby, it was competitive. But I swallowed my words. I had learned that my dreams didn't belong in their house. Not when they made too much noise. And so I began living my life in parentheses. Smiling when needed. Disappearing when not, listening to the applause Lauren got while wondering quietly if I'd ever be clapped for by anyone. But somewhere deep in that silence, something was growing. A fierce little flame. They could ignore me, but I wouldn't ignore myself. I decided I wanted to go to college when I was 15. It wasn't a sudden revelation, just a quiet knowing. A seed planted from years of hiding in the library during lunch breaks. Of scribbling ideas in the margins of old notebooks, of reading novels under my blanket with a flashlight long after midnight. When I finally told them, they laughed, not cruelly, just dismissively, like I'd said I wanted to be an astronaut or a princess. College. Dad raised an eyebrow. "You're not exactly Ivy League material, Nat," Mom chuckled. "Sweetheart, Lauren already cost us enough. We can't afford another tuition. Why don't you look into some local office jobs?" I stood there, blinking. I had a 3.9 GPA. I was taking AP classes. I had letters from teachers saying I was gifted. But none of that mattered to them. They had already written my story. Lauren was the one with potential. I was the backup plan. The one who didn't need investing in because, in their eyes, I'd never become anything worth bragging about. I remember nodding slowly. "Okay," I said. "I understand," but I didn't. Not really. And I couldn't let their version of me be the final draft, so I started applying anyway. I worked part-time at a bookstore after school. I tutored freshmen in English and algebra. I spent weekends writing essays and researching scholarships. At night, I'd stare at my ceiling and wonder if any of this would ever be enough to outrun the box they'd put me in. One morning, Mom caught me printing out a college application. She narrowed her eyes. "I thought we talked about this." "I'm applying for a scholarship," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's full ride. If I get it, you wouldn't have to pay anything." She didn't smile. Didn't say good luck. She just turned and walked away, muttering something about me wasting everyone's time. Sometimes the absence of hope is louder than anger, but I pressed on. I applied to every scholarship I could find us. A contests, merit-based grants, even obscure foundations that required handwritten letters. I mailed them all myself, licking the stamps with trembling hope. And slowly, replies trickled in. First, a small book fund. Then a state grant. Then, one afternoon, a letter from a private university 3 states away. Full academic scholarship, tuition, housing, meals, all covered. I wanted to scream, to dance, to cry, but no one was home. Lauren was out modeling for a local brand. My parents were in Palm Springs for a retreat. I stood alone in the kitchen, holding that letter to my chest, shaking like I'd been struck by lightning. I left the envelope on the dining table that night. I thought, maybe this would change things. Maybe this was at the moment they'd finally see me. But when they came home, Mom barely glanced at it. "That's nice," she said flatly. "But you'll still need money for other things. Textbooks, travel, clothes." Dad added, "And we're not paying for any of that, Natalie. We already told you. This is your decision, not ours." I nodded. Of course, my decision. My burden. So I picked up extra shifts, saved every dime. I bought my laptop from a pawn shop. I found secondhand dorm supplies online. I took the bus across 3 cities to get to orientation. Ben move-in day came. They didn't even help me pack. Lauren posted photos of her new NYC apartment that same day, with hashtags like #blessed and #designer on the rise. I sat in a tiny dorm room with secondhand sheets and a single suitcase, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But then my roommate walked in, a girl named Kennedy, with curly hair and paint-stained overalls, and she smiled like the sun. "Hey," she said. "You look like you could use pizza." That night, we sat cross-legged on the floor, eating dollar slices and talking about everything: books, heartbreak, ambition, the fear of being forgotten. It was the first time I felt seen in months. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into everything. Honors courses, study groups, volunteering. I became that girl who always raised her hand, who stayed after class to ask questions, who sat in the front row because I couldn't afford to waste even 1 second. I worked the library, front desk to make extra cash. I joined the debate team. I edited the student literary journal. Some nights I didn't sleep. I drank cheap coffee until my hands shook, but I kept going. Because there was no plan B, there was only this: succeed or disappear. And stilly didn't tell my parents how well I was doing. I guess part of me still wanted to save that surprise, to show them later, when it was undeniable. Sometimes, silence is the only weapon you have. Let them think you're failing. Let them look away. Because one day, when they finally turn back, you'll be standing taller than they ever imagined. By my second year, I wasn't just surviving, I was soaring. My professors knew my name. Some asked me to assist with research. One nominated me for a national academic fellowship. Kennedy used to joke that I made Hermione Granger look lazy. But I was tired, not of the work, of pretending I didn't care. Pretending it didn't hurt every time Lauren posted another glitzy photo from some rooftop bar, with Mom commenting, "So proud of my star." Pretending it didn't sting when I'd call home and no one asked me how classes were going, only whether I was still managing to eat. Like I was one step from crumbling. They still saw me as the burden, the mistake, the one who should have followed the path of least resistance. So I stopped calling. I started building my own world instead. And you know what? It was a beautiful one. I found people who believed in me. A professor who once stayed late just to help me prepare for an ethics debate. A classmate who gave me his copy of a textbook when I couldn't afford it. Kennedy, who showed up to every single one of my spoken word performances, screaming louder than anyone else. These people didn't share my blood, but they gave me something far more sacred: the space to become myself. Still, every time a holiday rolled around, I went home. Why? Maybe I was naive. Maybe I still hoped. But every visit was the same performance. Lauren would prance in with a new handbag and a glossy smile, basking in our parents' praise like sunlight. Dad would ask if she was still in talks with that casting agent, even if nothing ever came of it. Mom would pour her wine and say, "She has the look. Some people are just born with it." And me. They'd ask if I'd figured out what I wanted to do yet. I was majoring in political science and creative writing. I'd won 3 major academic awards. I was interning at a nonprofit that helped wrongfully convicted women. I was building something real. But I'd just nod and say, "Still figuring it out." Because what else could I say to people who never really listened? It wasn't all bitterness, just a slow erosion, a soft hollowing out of hope. You keep offering pieces of yourself, hoping one will finally be enough, but they never even glance at what's in your hands. That Christmas, I gave them framed copies of a short story I'd published in a national literary journal. It was my first printed piece. Mom opened it, squinted, and said, "Oh, how nice." She set it aside. Never asked what it was about. Lauren gave them scented candles. They raved about them for half an hour. And that was the moment something inside me crystallized. I realized they would never clap for me the way they clapped for her. Not because I hadn't earned it, but because they had already decided who I was, and they were too small to update the story. So I stopped needing the applause instead. I built louder. I became the president of 2 student organizations. I published 4 more essays. I led a campus initiative that helped secure scholarships for undocumented students. And then, near the end of junior year, I was called into the dean's office. I was nervous, of course. I thought maybe I'd forgotten to submit something, or missed a deadline. But instead, he sat me down, smiled, and said, "We've chosen our valedictorian for this year, and it's you, Natalie." I stared at him, my ears buzzed. "Me?" I whispered. He nodded. "Top GPA, academic honors. Community leadership, you're the perfect choice." I walked out of that room floating. Not because I needed the title, but because that girl who once printed her applications in secret had just been seen, really seen. The speech would be televised locally. Families were invited. The stage was mine. I knew I had to tell them, so I called home. Mom answered. "Graduation's coming up." I said, "Oh." She sounded distracted. "Already? That went by fast. There's going to be a speech. I'm the valedictorian." Silence. Then. "Valedictorian," she repeated, like I'd said I won the lottery by accident. "Yes, I'll be giving a speech. There's a reception, too. I thought you might want to come." Another pause. I could hear Lauren laughing in the background. Finally, she said, "Well, your father and I have a thing that weekend. A fundraiser in Santa Barbara. We'll see what we can do, but no promises." "Okay." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, okay." I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. They weren't coming. Not even now, but strangely. I didn't cry, because here's the thing: you learn to stop begging people to witness your light when they've made it clear they'd rather live in the dark. Graduation day was coming, and I wasn't walking across that stage for them. I was walking for every night I stayed up studying with aching eyes. For every rejection I turned into fuel. For every time they said I couldn't. And I did anyway, and most of all for the girl who printed her dreams in silence and never stopped believing she was more than the scraps they offered her. The auditorium was packed, rows and rows of faces, families holding bouquets, kids with balloons, camera flashes popping like stars. My name was printed on the program. Bold and unmistakable. Natalie Claire Williams, valedictorian. Kennedy was in the 3rd row, holding a sign that said, "Queen of Grit." She wore a crown she made from silver pipe cleaners. I laughed when I saw it. She winked and gave me a thumbs up. Her parents were next to her, clapping for me like I was one of their own. Behind them, empty chairs with my family's names on them, reserved, untouched, cold like the silence that followed my announcement. Weeks ago, they didn't come. Not Mom, not Dad, not even Lauren, who probably didn't want to risk smudging her makeup on a folding chair. I'd told myself this might happen. I'd rehearsed indifference like armor. But when I looked over those seats and saw they were still bare, even after the ceremony had started, something small inside me exhaled and never inhaled again. They'd chosen absence again, and this time, it was permanent. I sat on the stage with the other speakers, clutching the edge of my notes, but I didn't need them. I'd written every word from the marrow of my bones. The dean gave a short speech. Names were read. Diplomas were clutched with joy. Then he stepped up to the podium and smiled at the audience. "And now," he said, "it is my great honor to introduce our valedictorian, Natalie Williams." Applause. I stood. My legs were steady, but my heart, it was a war drum. I stepped up to the mic. The lights were hot. The silence was expectant. I didn't look at the empty seats. I looked at Kennedy. At my professors. At strangers who had become a kind of family. And then I began. When I was younger, I believed silence meant safety. I thought if I kept my dreams quiet, no one could take them from me. I thought if I didn't ask for help, no one could say no. I thought if I became invisible, I'd stop being a disappointment. But I was wrong. I paused. The room was still. Silence doesn't protect you, it starves you. I spent the first part of my life trying to be small enough to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. I twisted myself into shapes they could applaud: polite, obedient, quiet. But dreams don't grow in the shadows. They demand sunlight, space, voice. I saw Kennedy wipe her eyes. I didn't get here because I was the smartest. I got here because I was stubborn. Because I refused to give up, even when no one clapped. Even when my victories were met with shrugs or silence. Even when the people who were supposed to believe in me didn't. A murmur swept the crowd. People leaned forward. Some of you here today have your whole families cheering for you. I'm happy for you, truly, but this speech is for the ones who had to clap for themselves. For the ones who studied while working double shifts. Who mailed their own scholarship letters. Who moved into dorms alone and made homes out of nothing. Who carried dreams no one else saw and made them real anyway. I see you. And today, we rise together. Applause thundered like a wave, but I wasn't done. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not bitter. Because I've learned something powerful. You don't need their permission to matter. You don't need their presence to arrive. You don't need their applause to become loud. All you need is to keep going. My voice cracked. But I let it. Let it shake. Let it bleed. So to my younger self hiding in library corners, whispering dreams into notebooks, I say this: you were always worthy, you were always enough. And today, we proved it. Standing ovation. I stepped back, breathless, half shocked. My chest felt like it was on fire. A fire that had burned quietly for years, finally roaring. When I walked off the stage, strangers were crying, hugging. Professors shook my hand. A woman I didn't recognize grabbed my arm and whispered, "That speech, that was for me. Thank you." Kennedy launched herself into my arms. "They missed it," she said in my ear. "They missed your coronation." I smiled, but it was a sad smile. Because she was right, they didn't just miss the speech. They missed everything. And maybe that was the point. Later, I walked past the empty chairs one last time. My family's names printed on crisp paper. Unclaimed. Like promises. Never fulfilled. I didn't take the name cards with me. I left them there. Floating like ghosts in the air-conditioned silence. Because I was done dragging them through moments they never earned. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The world had already heard me. I had spoken, and I would never be silent again. The graduation reception was held in the university garden, white tents, strings of soft lights, and tables decked in gold and navy. I wore my honor cords like armor, the metal heavy around my neck, not from weight but from meaning. I was surrounded by warmth that didn't share my DNA. Professors who had believed in me when my own family hadn't. Classmates who had cried during my speech. Kennedy, of course, never leaving my side. Her parents hugged me like I was their own daughter. "We watched you grow," her mom said, voice trembling, "and we always knew this day would come." It was everything I needed, and yet, when I checked my phone, there it was. A text from Dad. "Saw a clip of your speech. Your mom showed me. We didn't realize you were valedictorian. Good job." That was it. No apology. No recognition of absence. No, "We're sorry we missed it." Just surprise, not even pride, just confusion. Like they were stunned that someone they'd dismissed for so long had managed to bloom. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, "Thanks. I sent you both the details weeks ago." He didn't respond. But that night, I got another message, this time from Lauren. Everyone at Dad's fundraiser saw the speech on Facebook. It's going kind of viral. Like, weirdly viral. Mom's freaking out a little. Weirdly viral. I checked. Sure enough, someone had recorded it and posted the full clip. It had over 100,000 views already. Thousands of comments, people resonating, relating, sharing their own stories of feeling unseen, unvalued. People were saying things like, "This girl spoke the words I've never had the courage to say to my own family. Cried watching this. I was the overlooked daughter too. She's the voice of every invisible child who made it anyway." And then, another message from Lauren. "Why didn't you tell us you were doing all this? Mom says it would have changed how we treated you." I almost laughed. Almost would have changed how they treated me. No, that wasn't how this worked. They weren't absent because they lacked information. They were absent because they lacked belief. And now, seeing the result, they were scrambling to rewrite the narrative, not because they cared, but because others were watching. Because now, I wasn't just the quiet, difficult one anymore. I was the valedictorian whose speech made strangers cry. And that made me useful, so I responded simply, "You didn't ask." That night, I sat with Kennedy on the roof of our apartment. We split a pint of ice cream, feet dangling over the ledge, the stars looking down like silent witnesses. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "They're all reaching out now. But I don't trust it." Kennedy didn't rush me. She never did. She just said, "Do you want them back in your life? Or do you want peace?" I didn't answer. Because the truth was, part of me still wanted them to care. Still wanted them to show up, not just because I was somebody now, but because I'd always been someone. But that version of the story, it wasn't real. And I was done feeding the fantasy. A few days later, I got a call. Mom, I let it ring. Then I let it ring again. On the third try, I picked up Natalie, she said. Her voice was brittle, unfamiliar. We saw the whole thing. Your father cried. Can you believe that? I didn't respond. You really should have told us, she continued. You looked beautiful up there. Strong. I did tell you, I said flatly. You just didn't listen. A pause. Well, we want to make it up to you, she offered. Come home this weekend, we'll do a little celebration. Just family. There it was. The offer to pretend. To sweep the years under the rug. To pretend this version of me had always existed in their minds, rather than the one they rolled their eyes at and dismissed. Why now? I asked. What do you mean? Why do you want to celebrate me now? Natalie, don't be difficult. There it was again. The word that had followed me since childhood. Difficult. Too much. Too loud. Too independent. But now I wore it like a crown. I'm not coming, I said. Natalie, you didn't show up when I needed you, I said, voice steady. And now that other people see me, you want in. But this moment. This wasn't yours to claim. You don't get to insert yourselves into a story you ignored. I heard her breathe in sharply. I'm not shutting you out forever. But I'm not playing pretend. If you want to be part of my life, you start by acknowledging what you missed. And you don't get to be center stage in a journey you never clapped for. She didn't reply. So I hung up, and I cried not because I was broken, but because I finally understood. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. And boundaries aren't cruelty. They're clarity. I was no longer the girl begging to be seen. I was the woman who stood alone on a stage and spoke her truth into the world. And that woman, she wasn't going back into the box they built for her. Not ever again. A few days passed. The phone calls stopped, mostly. The messages slowed down. Maybe they realized I wasn't going to cave. Or maybe they were just regrouping, deciding on a new angle. That's what it always was with the Mangles. Image, control, optics. But I'd shifted out of their reach. Not because I became famous overnight. Not because I went viral, but because I stopped asking for what they were never willing to give. Love with strings attached was no longer welcome. Still, the silence wasn't peaceful at first. You'd think it would be. You'd think cutting off a toxic thread would feel like relief. And in some ways it did. But grief doesn't always scream, it lingers. It shows up in quiet moments when you're making tea and remembering your mother used to add honey that way too. It shows up when you see a dad hugging his daughter outside a bookstore. It doesn't ask permission, it just arrives. But grief, I learned, can be the soil where something new grows. I was working part-time at a local literacy center volunteering. Really, helping underprivileged teens write college applications. One of the girls, Jada, reminded me a little too much of myself. She wore her anger like eyeliner, sharp, precise, defensive. One afternoon, she slammed her essay down on the table. Why even write this crap? No one's gonna pick me. My mom already said I should just look for work instead. I looked her dead in the eye and said, you know, they told me I'd never get into college. That I wasn't leadership material, that no one cared what I had to say. She blinked, surprised. What changed? I stopped asking permission. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, slowly, she picked the essay back up and started scribbling in the margins. That's when it hit me, my story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a mirror, a map, a fire starter. The version of me that stood alone at high school events while my parents cheered for Lauren. She became the reason I stayed present for Jada and Sarah. And Elijah. And Malik. Every kid who sat across from me, face hardening before they could be rejected first. Every kid who thought invisibility was safer than hope. I saw them. Because, once, I was them. One night, I stayed late. The office was quiet, save for the click of my laptop keys and the rain tapping the windows. My inbox pinged. A new message. Subject: Speaking invitation, commencement 2026. I blinked. It was from my old high school. They'd seen the speech. Apparently, someone on the school board had shared it at a meeting. They wanted me to return as the keynote speaker. My heart stuttered in my chest. This was the same school where I'd been voted most likely to stay local, where I'd stood in the background of every assembly, watching Lauren and her friends take center stage. The same school where teachers had called me too intense, too dramatic, too much. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, yes, not out of spite, not for revenge, but because I wanted the students sitting in that gymnasium, those who felt unseen, Unchosen. Second best to know they weren't alone, especially if no one in their family ever told them they mattered. A few weeks later, I walked into that auditorium, heart pounding. My heels echoed on the polished floor. Rows of folding chairs lined up like soldiers. The banner read, Class of 2026. Your story begins today. It felt like time folded in on itself. There, by the side door, stood Mr. Thompson, my old English teacher. He shook my hand, eyes wide. Never thought I'd see you back here like this. Neither did I said, smiling. But I've got something to say, and I did. I stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and began. I used to sit where you're sitting now, wondering if anyone would ever see past what they thought I was. I used to believe that being invisible was easier than being rejected. That staying small would hurt less. I was wrong. The words poured out, not rehearsed, but lived. I talked about the nights I cried alone while Lauren was praised for bringing home B's, about how I worked 2 jobs through college while my parents sent her rent money she didn't need, about the empty seat at my graduation. I used to think I needed their applause to know I mattered, but the truth is, your value isn't a vote. It isn't up for debate. And it isn't dependent on who shows up. Silence, then a standing ovation. Afterward, a line of students waited to speak with me, some with tears, others with fire in their eyes. Hope is contagious when it's honest. As I packed up to leave, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned Lauren. Of all people, Lauren. She looked nervous, out of place, almost. Hey, she said, I didn't think you'd actually come back. Neither did I admitted, but I'm glad I did. She shifted on her feet. Mom's been well, you know, but she watches your interviews, pretends she always supported you. I raised an eyebrow. Classic. A brief pause. Then she said, you're really doing something, Nat, like, something big. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel smaller in her shadow. I just nodded. I know, we didn't hug. We didn't cry. But there was something in the air, something real. Not quite forgiveness, not yet trust, but recognition. That was enough. As I walked to my car, I didn't look back at the building that once held my silence. I just drove forward, because I was no longer trying to prove I belonged in their story. I was too busy writing my own. 2 weeks later, I received a letter, not an email, not a message on social media. A real, handwritten letter. From my mother. The handwriting was shaky, like she'd paused too often, the ink smudged in places. My breath caught the second I opened it. Dear Natalie, I watched your speech, the whole thing. Lauren sent me the link. I didn't know you had that inside you. I didn't know you were carrying that much pain. I won't pretend I didn't fail you. I won't excuse what I prioritized, but I want to say, if there's any way we can fix what we broke, I'd like to try. Love, Mom. The part that stunned me wasn't the words, it was that they were hers. She'd always been the queen of not talking about things, of pretending nothing was wrong as long as dinner was made and the house looked clean. Emotion made her uncomfortable. Truth, even more so. This was new, but a letter doesn't rewrite history. And regret isn't the same as repentance. So I sat with it for a day, then 2, then a week. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure how to. I'd spent so many years rehearsing conversations that never happened, responses I never got. And now that something had come, I realized I wasn't sure if I still needed it. I was already full of my own choices, my own love, my own voice, but I was also human, and no matter how many speeches you give, how many lives you touch, there's still a part of you that wants to believe people can change, that your wounds weren't in vain. So I agreed to meet neutral ground. A small cafe tucked into the edge of town. She was already there when I arrived, hands folded around a cup of tea, like she needed the warmth to hold herself together. Natalie, she said, like the name was foreign in her mouth. Mom. Silence, a heavy stretching silence. Then she blurted, you look powerful. I almost laughed. That's a new one. I mean it, she said, eyes searching mine. You've become someone remarkable. I didn't thank her. Not yet. I wasn't ready to hand out grace just because she finally noticed the thing she once refused to see. Instead, I said, you know, I gave that speech without even thinking about whether you'd watch it, and for once, it felt freeing. Her face crumpled. I deserved that. I wasn't trying to punish you. I was just telling the truth. I know. That's what hurt. We sat there for a while. Not arguing, not accusing, just remembering. I told her about the nights I spent alone, about how I used to practice my graduation speech to an empty room, pretending someone cared. She told me about her own childhood, how her parents had shown love through criticism, not affection. It's not an excuse, she said. It's just I didn't know how to be better. I believed her. But I also believed this. The lack of a blueprint doesn't erase the harm of the building. I drew my line gently. I'm not angry anymore, I said, but I'm not going to shrink myself again to make you comfortable. If we're going to have a relationship, it's going to be one where I'm allowed to be me. Her eyes welled up. I want that. We left the cafe with no hugs, no dramatic reunions. Just the first fragile thread of something we might build, if we were both brave enough to keep showing up. But that wasn't the end. A week after that meeting, I got a call from an unknown number. A man answered when I picked up. Miss Williams. This is Roger Franklin. I'm your father's employer. I froze. He continued. He doesn't know I'm calling. But I wanted to tell you I saw your speech. And frankly, I'm stunned. I had no idea. You were his daughter. The words were slow, reverent. Thank you, I managed. I just want you to know, he said. I've got a few leadership opportunities at the foundation. And we'd be honored if someone like you would consider consulting for us. What you've built, it's the kind of integrity we need. I almost dropped the phone. Integrity. The one word my father used to weaponize. Every time I questioned his priorities, he'd say I lacked it. That I was soft, too idealistic. Now his boss was offering me a seat at a table my father used to say I'd never reach. That night I got another call. This time from him. Nat, he said, his voice low. I heard. You usually do, I replied. Long pause. I want to say congratulations. That's impressive. I let the silence hang. He added, your mother says you've been talking again. That's good. She's proud of you. Are you? I asked. Not bitter. Just direct. He cleared his throat. I am. I just didn't expect you to become someone the world would listen to. My chest tightened. Why not? I thought you'd break. There it was. Not even malice. Just cold underestimation. Well, I said, maybe next time. Bet on your daughter. He didn't answer. I didn't need him to, because I had already won. Not just the speech. Not just the awards. But the silence that followed, because in that silence, he had nothing left to take. He couldn't diminish me anymore. I had rewritten the story, and I was no longer asking to be a footnote in theirs. The funny thing about success is this: once it finds you, so do the people who once abandoned you. It wasn't long before my inbox became a strange garden of half-hearted apologies. Distant cousins congratulating me like they'd always believed in me, and high school classmates suddenly remembering we'd once shared a math class. But the strangest message came from Lauren. My sister. The one who had never missed a chance to remind me I was too intense. Too dramatic. Too much. Her message was 3 sentences. Hey, Mom said you're back in town and that you gave some big speech, or whatever. Wanna grab coffee? No punctuation, no warmth, just entitlement. Like we were still close. Like she hadn't laughed when I cried at Dad's rejection. Like she hadn't taken the last sliver of parental approval and worn it like a crown. Part of me wanted to ignore her. Just delete the message and go on with my day. But another part of me, one I hadn't yet outgrown, still wanted her to see me. Not tolerate me. Not placate me. See me. See me. So I said yes. We met at a sleek cafe downtown. She looked exactly the same, polished, effortless, emotionally bulletproof. She greeted me like no time had passed. So, Miss Valedictorian, she smirked, raising her cup. Didn't see that coming. I smiled politely. Neither did you. Her smile faltered just a bit. You always had this fire. I just figured it'd burn out. It didn't, I said. It learned to light its own way. She blinked. Okay, poet. We sat in the brittle tension of people who used to share a room but not a world. I watched your speech, she said finally. Mom cried. Dad didn't say much. Shocking, I replied. She rolled her eyes. You're still bitter. No, I'm aware. She bristled. That's the thing about people who've always had the upper hand when you rise. They feel like you're stealing something, even if all you're doing is standing. I just think, she said, carefully, you made them look bad. They made themselves look bad, I corrected. I just stopped covering for it. Do you have to be so dramatic? No, I choose to be so honest. Lauren leaned back. You really think you're better than us now, don't you? No, I said calmly. I think I'm better than the version of me you all used to treat like a punchline. Silence. Then she said something that knocked the breath out of me. Do you know how hard it was being me, too? I stared at her. What do you mean? Always being the favorite, she said bitterly. It's not as golden as you think. You think I wanted to be their golden girl? Every choice I made had to be perfect. There was no room to fail. No room to breathe. They treated you like glass, but they treated me like a weapon. I blinked. It was the first time she ever admitted the pressure. The first time I saw the cracks in her mask, and yet, the part of me that had survived years of her smugness didn't know whether to offer empathy, or just leave. I guess we both lost something, I murmured. I guess, she whispered. She stirred her coffee for a long time, then said, So what happens now? Are we good? I looked at her. Ellie looked. This was the girl who once told me I'd never be more than a second-rate version of her. The girl who used my grief as gossip. Who watched me fall, and never offered a hand. But now she looked small, not pitiful, just lost, and maybe for the first time in years. I wasn't the one who felt that way. I don't know what we are, I said honestly. But I know I'm not going to pretend none of it happened. She nodded slowly. Fair. We left it there, no hugs, no selfies, just truth. But that night, I journaled something I hadn't dared to believe before. Healing doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes, it means walking past the places you used to beg for entry. And realizing, you've outgrown the need to be let in. And from that day on, I started building my own table. One where everyone had a seat. If they brought honesty, one where love wasn't earned through silence, but through presence. I filled it with chosen family, friends who saw me before the spotlight, mentors who nurtured my voice, students who reminded me why I rose in the first place. We laughed hard. We spoke freely. We wept without shame, and every time someone asked me how I did it, how I made it through the years of being invisible, I said this: they underestimated the wrong daughter. I didn't change my number, but I stopped picking up certain calls. Not out of malice, out of clarity, because when you spend your whole life begging someone to see your worth, and then one day they finally look up, you start to ask yourself, do I still want their attention, or do I just want peace? My parents called the week after my speech aired online, not once during finals, not once during my anxiety attacks, or ramen dinners or endless walks home under the freezing dusk. But now they had time. My mom's voice on the voicemail was strained, like she was trying not to sound too impressed. We saw your speech. It was ... very well done. You looked beautiful. I didn't realize you'd done so well. Didn't realize. Of course you didn't. I stopped sending report cards after the third semester. I stopped bringing up scholarships, or clubs, or research grants. I stopped offering parts of myself to be ignored, and now suddenly it mattered. My dad didn't leave a message. But I saw his number twice. Once at 9:14 p.m. Once at 2:42 a.m. And I sat there, just looking at the missed calls. A younger version of me would have called back right away. Would have dreamed up some fantasy of them finally getting it, finally making things right. But that girl, she'd already graduated. I didn't want apologies wrapped in guilt. I wanted acknowledgement without conditions. And when it didn't come, I didn't crumble. I didn't spiral. I just carried on. I was accepted into a competitive postgrad program in the city, working alongside people I used to idolize. The first week, one of the professors I admired turned to me after a seminar and said, "Your analysis reminded me of Baldwin. And your delivery, like Morrison met fire." I cried in the bathroom stall afterward. Not because I was weak, but because I was finally seen by someone who never had a reason to lie. I was offered a full ride for the next 2 years, a stipend, a position as a guest speaker at 2 high schools. Suddenly, I wasn't just a name on a diploma, was a voice people listened to. And yet, not once did I send a photo home. Not once did I share the links. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't need to prove it anymore. That's the thing they never tell you about success. It doesn't always come with confetti or reconciliation. Sometimes, it just comes with relief. There were quiet nights, sure, where I'd wonder if they ever sat around the dinner table and felt the space I used to fill. If they ever looked at Lauren and asked, did we miss something? But then I'd remind myself, I wasn't building my life for their regret. I was building it for my own freedom. Because somewhere along the way, I realized, I am not the lack of love I received. I am not the sister who was ignored. I am not the daughter who wasn't invited to the front row. I am the woman who stood at a podium and told the truth in a voice she built by herself. And that's enough. One day, at an alumni mixer, a girl came up to me, nervous, clutching a notepad. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know you don't know me, but your speech changed everything for me. I've been trying to survive my family's silence for years. When you said, you don't need their permission to bloom, I cried for 3 hours. Thank you." I hugged her tightly because I knew that ache, and because sometimes, the families we create from pain are more sacred than the ones we're born into. You reading this? Yes, you might still be in the silence, still waiting for someone to notice your light. But hear me, you do not need their eyes to be bright. You are bright. You are the fire they tried to put out, and one day, when they turn around and find themselves in the dark, they'll realize you were the light they never deserved. So build your life. Not to shock them, not to spite them, but to heal yourself. Because healing is the loudest victory, and peace is the greatest name you'll ever earn. I didn't tell anyone in my family that I was moving. I didn't send a group text. I didn't call. I didn't forward my new address or invite anyone to help me pack. I slipped out of that old life, like peeling off skin that never fit. And, you know what's strange? It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. You'd think walking away from your parents, your blood would feel like cutting something vital. But for me, it felt like finally breathing after years of holding my breath. The new apartment was small but sunlit. It overlooked the university's rose garden, where professors and students alike walked with their coffee and unread books. I used to watch them from the library window and wonder what it felt like to belong in a place like that. Now I had keys to it. I decorated the walls with old poetry clippings, secondhand art prints, and postcards I never sent. And on the fridge, in bold, black letters on a whiteboard I'd found at Goodwill, I wrote a single sentence: build the family that sees you. And slowly, I did. It started with Nina. She was the first professor who remembered my name, not because I was in her class, but because she saw me cry once in the library and left a granola bar next to me with a sticky note that said, "You matter." Then, there was Amari, a barista who noticed I always studied until closing and started slipping me an extra shot in my coffee and playing my favorite playlists over the speakers. "Don't burn out," she'd say. "People like you are supposed to lead revolutions." And finally, Elijah, the PhD student who asked to read my valedictorian speech, and then sent me a 3-page email breaking down everything he loved about it line by line. "You're not just smart," he wrote, "you're necessary." No one asked about my family. No one pried into why I flinched at compliments or hesitated to take up space. They just accepted me not as the girl who needed fixing but as the woman who'd survived fire and turned it into fuel. One night, after an open mic event where I'd performed a spoken word piece about abandonment, I stood in the hallway outside the auditorium, while people filtered past me. And then Anne, older woman, someone's aunt probably, stopped and said, "Whoever didn't show up for you, thank you, because it made you become this." Her voice cracked on this. And my chest cracked a little too. I didn't cry, I smiled, because for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't the hole they left behind. I was everything I built to fill it. I started mentoring freshman students who felt out of place, those who were too poor, too quiet, too brown, too broken, too different to fit in the way the catalog brochures said they should. And every time I sat across from one of them, I saw younger versions of me, terrified but brilliant, doubtful but bursting with potential. I told them what no one told me: you are not a burden to be hidden. You are a story that's still being written. It became my mission, my rebellion. If my parents gave me silence, I would give others voice. If they abandoned me, I would become the arms I never had. If they ignored my achievements, I would amplify someone else's. You see what I mean, don't you? Maybe you're still sitting at that dinner table, being talked over. Maybe your name is still missing from the family group chat. Maybe they still praise your brother's C- while ignoring your 4.0, but I promise you, there are people out there, strangers even, who will love you with a fierceness your family never could. They'll celebrate you without conditions. They'll remember your birthday without needing reminders. They'll show up in small, quiet ways until it feels like you've known them forever. You don't have to keep trying to make ghosts clap for you. The living are waiting. The ones who'll see you, truly see you. You just have to open the door. Back in my apartment, I took down that whiteboard. In its place, I framed a new quote, chosen Family isn't lesser. It's earned. And every day, I live by it, because while my parents still hadn't asked to hear my speech, or visit my campus, or even say the words, "We were wrong," I no longer needed them to. I was no longer waiting for someone to crown me worthy. I'd done it myself, and this time, the crown was made of everything they tried to bury. My voice, my grit, my refusal to shrink, and the best part, it fit perfectly. It was the email that changed everything. Not the one from my mom. Not the dozen voicemails from my dad that still sat unopened in my inbox. This was from the University Press Office. Subject, feature request University Valedictorian, story. I blinked at the screen. They wanted to do a profile on me. My journey, my speech, the fact that I was the first student in the department's history to graduate summa cum laude with dual majors in literature and sociology while working 2 jobs, leading the student mentoring program, and publishing 3 research papers. We think your story will inspire a lot of students, the message read. Can we schedule a time to interview you and maybe take a few photos? I hesitated. For a moment, I could feel the pull. What if they see this? What if the whole family finds out this way? But then, I smiled. Let them find out. Let them read every word they ignored when it came from my mouth. Let them sit with the truth in glossy print, distributed across campus and posted on alumni blogs. The feature was published a week later. It opened with a quote from my speech. Sometimes you rise, not to be seen, but because silence is no longer survivable. The article went viral within the campus community. It was reposted on student groups, picked up by the local city newspaper, and even featured on a national student leadership newsletter. And that's when everything shifted. Lauren called me. This time, I picked up. Her voice was tight. You really didn't think to tell us? I didn't think you'd care, I replied, honest and soft. That's not fair. No, I said. What's not fair is making a child feel invisible and then being shocked when they stop looking for you. There was a silence on the other end. She didn't hang up, but she didn't argue either. It felt hollow, like someone standing in a room that used to belong to them but no longer did. They saw the article, she finally said. Mom cried. Raised an eyebrow, not that she could see it. Did she cry because she was proud, or because she wasn't in it? Lauren didn't answer, and she didn't need to. Because I knew my parents weren't reaching out because they'd changed. They were reaching out because I had. Because suddenly, the daughter they pushed to the margins had become visible in a way they couldn't ignore. Their silence used to be my shame. Now it was their regret. I got a text later that night from an unknown number. You should have told us. We would have come. No name. No punctuation. Just that. I stared at the screen, heart surprisingly calm. They were trying to rewrite the story, trying to suggest it was a misunderstanding that I had failed to include them. But here's the truth. They had every chance to be part of the journey. They just never showed up until the applause started, so I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone and walked down the quiet street to Amari's cafe, where we were hosting a poetry night. I read a new piece. One I hadn't planned to share. Yet it ended with, you called it rebellion, but it was resurrection. You thought I was running away. I was building a life you weren't brave enough to imagine for me. People stood, clapped, some cried. No one asked where my parents were, because no one expected me to prove I was worthy anymore. I already was. Do you know how powerful that is? To no longer need the people who made you feel small to tell you you're big, to stop begging them to see you, and instead let them witness your shine from the distance they created. It's not cruel. It's clarity. It's the difference between being tolerated and being treasured. A week after the article came out, I received an invitation to speak at the State Education Summit. Keynote speaker. Honorarium included. All expenses paid. They wanted me to talk about resilience, about what it meant to grow up unseen and still choose to take up space. And I knew exactly what I would say. That some people never get the apology they deserve, but they still bloom. That absence can leave scars, yes, but it can also create space for strength to grow. That the most radical thing you can do, sometimes, is stop waiting for their love. And love yourself instead. You may not get there, we're proud of you. You may not get there, we were wrong. You may not get there, tears or their applause. But you will get something better. You will get you, and you are more than enough. I stood backstage at the State Education Summit in a tailored black blazer and the pair of heels I once bought secondhand for job interviews. My name was printed on the program beneath the bold heading, Keynote Speaker, Valedictorian, and Advocate. For equity in education, when they called me up, I didn't tremble. I didn't hesitate. I walked with the kind of calm that comes from being broken and rebuilt by your own hands. The lights on the stage were warm. The microphone smelled faintly of metal and nerves, and the audience was full of teachers, professors, policymakers, people who had the power to make someone else's life different. Better. I began, not with a statistic, but with a confession. I didn't grow up with encouragement. I didn't grow up being told I was gifted. I didn't grow up knowing that people like me could end up in rooms like this. I told them about the late nights studying in silence because no one asked how school was going, about being told I was selfish for applying to colleges that cost too much, about hearing my father tell my sister she was the real academic in the family, even when I was already on the honor roll. The crowd didn't make a sound. Some took notes, some blinked slowly, as if the weight of those words hit them where it hurt. I let them sit in that silence for a moment before I added, but I'm here. And I didn't get here because of what I was given. I got here because of what I wasn't. I got here because the absence of belief forced me to become my own source of faith. I spoke for 22 minutes, and when I stepped off the stage, people stood, a standing ovation, not just because of what I'd said, but because they saw in me something that didn't need translation: truth. That night, the summit posted clips of my speech online. One of them went viral. It ended up on the news. Then it ended up on Facebook, and that's when my aunt messaged me. "I saw your video, sweetheart. We had no idea. I'm so sorry we weren't there for you." I didn't even know she followed me, but I remembered her face at family dinners, always turned toward Lauren, always asking about her boyfriend, her classes, her internship. She was part of it too. Still, her words felt softer, honest, maybe. I replied, "Thank you, I'm doing okay now. I've found people who make me feel seen." She hearted the message, then typed another, "I hope your parents are proud, even if they don't know how to show it." And that's when I realized something important. Maybe they don't. Maybe they were never taught how to love a child like me, a child who didn't fit, who questioned, who wanted more than quiet obedience. Maybe their silence wasn't just neglect. Maybe it was fear, or shame, or their own unresolved failures passed down like rusted heirlooms. But understanding isn't the same as accepting. And forgiveness doesn't mean return. So when my dad called me later that week, yes, he actually called, I answered. His voice was older than I remembered. "I saw the video," he said. "You looked grown." I chuckled softly. "I am grown." He cleared his throat. "You know, your mom and we're talking about visiting, maybe taking you out to dinner. Celebrate." I took a breath. Let the pause speak. Then I asked, "Would you have said that if I hadn't been on the news?" He didn't answer, so I continued. "Because I was worth celebrating long before any of this. I was worth loving when I was writing papers at 3 a.m. and crying in the bathroom before work shifts. I was worthy when I was invisible." He exhaled. "You don't make this easy." And I said, "I'm not supposed to. Because I wasn't the one who made love conditional. I wasn't the one who saw my child shine and chose to squint instead of open my eyes." We spoke for 8 more minutes. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cruel either. It was factual. Like people dividing up land they no longer plan to share. I told him I was speaking at another event in Chicago. He asked if I needed money. I said, "I don't need anything from you anymore." And I meant it. You see, there's a strange freedom that comes when you realize the people who held your childhood don't have to hold your future. You can carry the lessons without carrying the weight. You can be the adult your younger self needed. Without asking your family to change first. I hung up, not angry, not triumphant, just free. That night, I sat by my window as the city lights flickered, like distant stars, and I whispered something I never thought I'd say without bitterness. "Thank you for not believing in me. Because your disbelief lit a fire I never would have found on my own. And now I light that same fire for others." It was during a school visit in Atlanta, standing in a gymnasium full of high school seniors, that it hit me. I had become the kind of adult I used to search for. I wasn't supposed to be there, at least. Not according to the version of my life my parents had envisioned in their world. I was supposed to stumble, to come back home humbled, to admit they were right, to beg for guidance, for money, for approval. Instead, I was handing out copies of a book I'd written about access to education for low-income students. I was being introduced by school principals and hugged by girls who said things like, "You made me feel seen." No one ever told me I could be more than my neighborhood. And I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planting trees I'd never sit under. Later that evening, I met up with Amari and a few mutual friends at a cozy downtown bookstore cafe. They'd hosted a reading of my newest poem, An Aching Piece About Absence and the Illusion of Home, and as the last lines hung in the air, a young woman from the audience approached me with tears on her cheeks. "You wrote my story," she whispered. I wanted to hug her, and I did. It never stops shocking me. How many of us are walking around with the same bruises, the same questions, the same ache for family that doesn't look back? And somehow, in sharing those wounds, we become less alone. That's what Amari and I had started to build, an online space where stories like mine, and hers, and yours, could live. We called it the Unseen Archive. People submitted stories anonymously, some in the form of letters they never sent, some as essays, some as voice memos. We shared them weekly with permission, paired with art and poetry, creating this quiet revolution of survival. It grew fast, faster than we could have imagined. Somewhere along the way, journalists started calling. Mental health nonprofits reached out. Schools requested workshops. And then a foundation offered us a grant to expand the program nationwide. At 25, I became the founder and director of a nonprofit I hadn't even dared dream of when I was 17 and cleaning offices to afford bus fare. And you know what's funny? Not once in those applications, or meetings, or interviews, did anyone ask what my parents did. No one asked if I came from a good family. No one needed me to be the golden child. They only cared about the work, about my heart, about the truth. One day, while sorting through messages from our site, I found one that made my hands still on the keyboard. It was from Lauren. "I saw what you've built. It's powerful. I guess I didn't understand before. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for the times I played along with them, for the way we all made you feel small. I'd like to visit, if that's okay. Not as your sister, just as someone who admires you." I sat with that message for a long time. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't pretending it never happened. She was just telling the truth. Quietly, gently, without demand, and that mattered. So I wrote back, "Thank you, that means more than you know. I'm open to talking." We met a month later. Neutral ground, a botanical garden halfway between her city and mine. She didn't come with excuses, or stories, or spin. She came with eyes that no longer looked down on me, and that was enough. We walked for 2 hours. Mostly in silence, occasionally breaking it with memories that used to hurt, and now just floated. She told me Mom had started therapy, that Dad still didn't understand what he did wrong but was trying. I didn't ask to meet them. I told her I hoped they healed, but I wouldn't make myself small again to fit into their version of love. Lauren nodded. "I think you're braver than all of us." I smiled. I think I just ran out of reasons to keep pretending I wasn't. And when we parted, I felt lighter, not because I had them back, but because I had me. Do you understand what that means? To no longer crave their love like oxygen, to no longer shape yourself around the ghost of their approval, to stop auditioning. That's where peace lives, not in revenge, not in performance, but in stillness, in the quiet certainty that you no longer need to be chosen by those who never saw you to begin with. You are no longer the echo of their rejection. You are your own voice, and it's loud and clear and worthy. The invitation came in the mail. A cream-colored envelope, too formal to ignore. My name, typed in a slightly uneven font, was centered in black ink. "You are cordially invited to the Wilson family reunion." At the bottom, in smaller font, it added, "Hosted by James and Patricia Wilson, my parents." I stared at it for longer than I care to admit. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what I wouldn't do. I would not walk into that gathering to play the part of the prodigal daughter finally returning, contrite and eager to rejoin the fold. I would not pretend like nothing had happened, like the silence, the cruelty, the constant comparisons hadn't shaped every jagged edge of my youth, but I did allow myself one moment. One tiny, curious flicker of what if? What if they truly wanted to see me? What if against all odds they were proud? What if, for once, they could say it? Then I caught myself. That old hunger again, creeping in like a shadow. The need to be seen, to be chosen. I closed the envelope, walked it to the trash, and dropped it in. Because you don't go back to the fire just because you're no longer burning. A week later, I spoke at a charity gala for underrepresented youth in tech. It was hosted in San Francisco, at a glass-ceiling venue overlooking the bay. The kind of event my family would have laughed at years ago, calling it pointless or soft or just more of that artsy nonsense. But there I was, standing beneath chandeliers, dressed in sleek navy silk. My story now woven into every dollar raised, every mentor match made. And across the room, as I finished my speech, a man approached me mid-50s, white hair at the temples, eyes that had clearly seen too much of the boardroom and too little of real struggle. "You're Emma Wilson?" he asked. I nodded. "I saw your name on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list," he said. "My daughter follows you online. She says you made her feel like she could make it through college." I thanked him politely, shaking his hand. Then he added, "I looked you up. I'm a former colleague of your father's." Small world. Ah, that old world again, trying to creep back into this one. "He used to talk about you," the man said. I stiffened. "But not like you'd think," he continued. "He always said you were smart, stubborn, didn't listen. He used to complain you were too independent, too emotional." I laughed, a bitter edge in my throat. "Sounds accurate," I said. Then the man's tone shifted. "I think he was scared," he said, "of how bright you were. Of the way you didn't need anyone's permission." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. He handed me his card. "If you ever want to talk more about expanding your program into public schools, I am in." I left that night with a strange tightness in my chest. Not sadness, not pride, just clarity. They were watching. From a distance. Always had been, but they couldn't name my value without choking on their own pride. And now, the world was naming it for them. And you know what? That was enough. Didn't need their words anymore. The stage was my reply. The lives I touched were my echo. Back home, I updated the bio on the Unseen Archive website. I added a new line beneath my photo. Emma Wilson, founder, educator, once invisible, now undeniable. Then I logged into our inbox and opened a message from a girl named Maya. "I don't have a real family. I have people who live in the same house, but they don't see me. Your video made me feel brave enough to apply to college, even if I have to do it in secret." I wrote back, "You are not crazy. You are not too much. You are just enough, exactly as you are. And whether they ever clap for you or not, I will." And I meant it. For her, for every kid like us. For the ones sitting alone in their rooms, right now, thinking they're broken. Just because they were never celebrated. You are not broken. You are not forgotten. And you are not theirs too. Define. I didn't attend the Wilson family reunion, but my name did. Someone sent a photo, one of those family group shots taken at the end of the day, all pastel shirts and forced smiles. Near the back, someone held a printout of Forbes, the 30 Under 30 inches issue. My name was circled, underlined in red ink. Like they had something to prove. Like I belonged to them after all. I laughed when I saw it. Not out of cruelty, just out of disbelief. They wanted me on the mantle, but not at the table. They wanted to claim the outcome, but never once helped me through the process. You want to know the hardest part of healing? It's realizing the apology you've waited your whole life for may never come, not in the form you imagined, not with the words you rehearsed, sometimes not at all. But still, you must go on. Still, you must become. I used to think I'd healed the day. My parents said they were proud of me. Now, I know I healed the moment I no longer needed them to. Instead, I let my work speak. I let my peace answer. I let my life become the proof. Because the truth is sometimes, the people who break you can't be the ones who fix you. Sometimes, you build your own scaffolding. Brick by aching brick, and one day, you look up and realize, you didn't just rebuild. You rose higher than they ever expected, higher than they were willing to reach. Remember the day time called me a changemaker. I remember walking into a high school auditorium named after me. I remember the night I spoke at the White House about equitable education access, and a senator asked for my advice. But what I remember most is the girl I used to be. 17, shoulders tight from fear, heart full of hope, hands raw from cleaning, eyes always scanning for a sign that someone saw her. And if I could reach through time, I'd wrap her in my arms and say, "You don't have to earn love, that should have been given freely. You don't need to make yourself small to be safe. You are not a burden. You are a beginning." I think of her every time I see a young person try to hide their dreams because someone at home called them stupid, or lazy, or ungrateful. I See her in the kids who shrink in the presence of people who should protect them. And I make them this promise. You are not alone. I know the world is full of voices telling you to wait, to be quiet, to settle. But I am here to remind you that your story matters. Your voice matters. Even if no one claps. Even if no one comes. Especially then. Because sometimes, your greatest audience is your future self, watching, waiting, wishing you'd choose you. I did, and I'll never regret it. You see, I didn't go back. I didn't call them when I made it. But I didn't need to. I became the kind of success they couldn't ignore. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted freedom. And now, when people ask me how I did it, how I rose without roots, I tell them this: I was never watered by them. But I learned to bloom anyway.